If your grocery bill jumped this year, this video is about you. If your job feels shakier than it did 5 years ago, this is why. Most Americans think China is trying to beat the US. They're wrong. China isn't fighting America. They're redesigning the system America depends on. So how does the world's strongest economy slowly lose leverage without a single war? In the next few minutes, you'll see exactly how China is making quiet moves right now that will show up as higher prices, fewer choices, and less control in your daily life, and why most Americans have no idea it's happening. If you want to understand these shifts before they hit your paycheck, hit subscribe. And drop a comment below. Do you think the US sees this coming, or are we already late? Cable news wants you focused on tariffs. Politicians want you arguing about elections. Because as long as Americans are divided on the surface, nobody looks underneath. Every sound bite, every outrage cycle, every headline about trade wars. It's all noise hiding a much bigger story. This isn't a trade war, it's a dependency war. And the most dangerous player isn't the one shouting the loudest. It's the one you can't easily replace. Think about your internet provider, or your phone's app store. You don't fear them because they're aggressive. You fear them because switching is nearly impossible. That's the exact game being played at a global scale right now. Power today isn't about who produces the most. It's about who controls the bottlenecks. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. For over 30 years, China has been executing a single, uninterrupted economic strategy. While political parties changed hands in the US every few years, while administrations flipped their priorities every election cycle, China stuck to one long-term plan built on a simple idea: control the critical points of global supply. Not the whole supply chain, just the choke points, the parts you can't work around. Look at shipping ports. China handles more container traffic than the next 5 countries combined. 7 out of the world's 10 busiest ports are Chinese-operated. That's not accident. That's design. Now look at rare earth elements, those obscure materials inside your smartphone, your electric car, your military equipment. China processes around 60 to 70% of the global supply. Pharmaceuticals? Many of the active ingredients in American medicines, the stuff that actually makes the pills work, trace back to factories in China. Over 90% of certain critical supply chains trace back to one country. Remember that number. 90%. Let that sink in. While America optimized for efficiency and cheap prices, China optimized for resilience and control. One side chased quarterly profits and shareholder returns. The other built a 30-year strategy to own the world's arteries. And here's the kicker. Most Americans don't even know the game is being played. Have you noticed how certain products take longer to arrive now? How prices creep up but never really come back down? That's not just inflation. That's friction. And friction is what losing leverage looks like in 2025. The US won't collapse. That's not how modern power shifts work. Instead, America will quietly lose options. You won't see explosions or breaking news alerts declaring the end. You'll just notice fewer choices on the shelf. Slower restocks, higher costs that become the new normal. It doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like normal life getting tighter, one notch at a time. Fewer brands available, longer wait times for car parts or appliances. Jobs that used to feel stable suddenly aren't. And the uncomfortable truth? This isn't a 20-year problem on the horizon. It's already unfolding, right now, while you're watching this video. Jeff Bezos once said, "In the long run, everything is a system." And that's the key to understanding what's really happening. China thinks in systems, America debates inside them. Beijing maps supply chains like chessboards, planning 10 moves ahead, building infrastructure that locks in dependencies for decades. The US runs supply chains like open markets, assuming competition will always self-correct, and that efficiency equals strength. The difference: systems don't fail from direct attack. They fail from slow, unmanaged dependence. Every factory moved overseas to cut costs. every critical component outsourced to boost margins, every supply chain stretched thinner for quarterly earnings. It all compounds silently. Dependency isn't built overnight. It's layered across decades, one seemingly smart business decision at a time. And by the time you realize how deep it runs, reversing it costs more than any politician is willing to pay or any voter is willing to absorb. Now here's where it stops being abstract theory and becomes very real. Let me tell you about a small country that learned this lesson the hard way. In 2007, Sri Lanka needed a deep water port. They didn't have the money, but China offered to fund it, over $1 billion in loans for the Hambantota port project. Chinese firms handled construction, hired local workers, brought in equipment, created thousands of jobs and tax revenue. On paper, everyone won. Sri Lanka got infrastructure it couldn't afford on its own. China got a strategic foothold along one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. But here's the twist. Years later, when Sri Lanka couldn't keep up with debt payments, the terms changed. In 2017, they handed over control of the port to China on a 99-year lease. The loan wasn't the problem. The problem was that by the time the bill came due, Sri Lanka couldn't say no anymore. It had become structurally dependent. Sovereignty wasn't conquered with tanks or soldiers. It was slowly rented out through loans and infrastructure deals. And that same pattern is repeating in Pakistan with Gwadar Port, in Kenya with railways, in Greece with Piraeus Port. Dozens of countries, same playbook. Port by port, road by road, energy grid by energy grid. Beijing understood something Washington completely missed. Control the infrastructure, and you don't need to control the politics. The economy does that for you. Think about it this way. Which lasts longer, a defense treaty that can be broken with a signature and a press conference, or an economy that literally can't function without your cooperation? China learned to make itself too essential to replace. Not through military threats or hostility, through convenience, through being the cheapest, fastest, most reliable option, until suddenly you realize there is no other option. And that's the trap most people miss, because dependency doesn't feel like chains when it's forming. It feels like a really good deal, until one day it's not. If this is starting to make sense, let me show you the part almost nobody talks about. Here's the uncomfortable truth that changes everything. China doesn't want to destroy the US economy. They want it to keep running, on Chinese terms, because a dependent partner is far more valuable than a defeated enemy. Think about your last Amazon order, or your iPhone sitting in your pocket right now. You didn't think twice about where it came from, who assembled it, or what countries the parts traveled through to reach you. That's the genius of this strategy. Dependency doesn't announce itself with banners and speeches. It embeds itself so deeply into daily life that questioning it feels impractical, almost absurd. Cheap goods, fast shipping, lower costs. It all works beautifully, frictionlessly, until one day the terms quietly shift. And by the time you feel trapped, the exits are already gone. We've built a global system that rewards short-term efficiency and punishes long-term resilience. And someone just figured out how to redesign the rules while everyone else was still playing the old game. Even the American corporations that once led globalization now find themselves caught in it. Apple designs in California but relies on Chinese manufacturing networks so intricate, so specialized, that moving them would take a full decade and cost hundreds of billions. They've tried shifting to India and Vietnam. It's not working at the scale needed. Tesla depends on Chinese battery supply chains for the lithium, cobalt, and processing that powers every car they make. Boeing sources critical components from China. Qualcomm's chips get manufactured there. Even parts of the US defense industry rely on materials refined or assembled in China. Shifting that doesn't happen with one executive order or one passionate speech. It requires years of sustained investment, political will that lasts across multiple election cycles, and costs that someone, consumers, corporations, or taxpayers, has to absorb. And every day of delay compounds the leverage on the other side. Every day, wait, the dependency gets a little deeper. So how did we get here? Rewind to the 1990s. The US believed globalization would democratize the world, that as countries got wealthier through trade, they'd naturally become more like America. Open markets, individual freedoms, liberal democracy, spreading through economic integration. It was called engagement theory, and almost every Western leader believed in it. China saw it completely differently. They realized that if you control globalization's infrastructure, the ports, the factories, the energy grids, the digital backbones, you don't need to mimic the superpower. You can quietly recode the entire system. So while America exported Hollywood movies and democratic ideals, China built ports in 70 countries, invested in energy infrastructure across 4 continents, and quietly cornered markets in the materials everyone would need for the next 50 years. America got addicted to low costs and consumer convenience. China got addicted to control and long-term positioning. Both sides believed they could outlast the other. But here's the difference. One of those strategies compounds silently, invisibly over decades. The other keeps resetting every 4 to 8 years. When you buy an iPhone, you're participating in a global lesson on economic asymmetry. Designed in California. Assembled in Shenzhen. Components from 12 countries. Shipped worldwide. Apple controls the design, the software, the brand. China controls the assembly, the logistics, the supply of rare earths in the chips, and increasingly, the entire parts pipeline. The question isn't who profits more in the short term. The question is, who bends when supply shocks hit? The pandemic lockdowns gave us a preview. Remember when you couldn't find basic electronics? When car production stopped because of chip shortages? That wasn't just a pandemic problem, that was a dependency problem suddenly made visible. And more importantly, it showed whose side of the supply chain matters more when things break. Think of it like oxygen. No one thinks about who controls the oxygen supply until suddenly you can't breathe. Power in the modern world is built on that exact principle, the ability to pause, slow, or reroute flows of energy, data, materials, or goods. The most powerful country isn't the one with the most factories or the biggest military. It's the one controlling the choke points you can't replace quickly. Now, let me show you something even more invisible. The phrase "made in China" has completely evolved. It used to mean cheap plastic toys or low-quality knockoffs. Now it means strategic interconnection at the highest levels of technology. China didn't stay stuck making T-shirts and cheap electronics. They moved up the value ladder with ruthless precision. Semiconductors, advanced batteries, solar panels, artificial intelligence systems, 5G telecom networks. Each step tightened global dependencies just a little more, whether it's Huawei building 5G infrastructure in over 70 countries, or Chinese solar panels powering renewable energy grids worldwide, or TikTok's algorithm knowing more about American teenagers than most US companies do. China has positioned itself at the center of systems too expensive, too complex, and too embedded to rewire overnight. And here's the deep irony nobody talks about. Even the green energy transition, the massive global shift meant to make the world more sustainable and less dependent on Middle Eastern oil, might actually make the world more centralized than ever before. Because electric vehicles, smart grids, solar farms, and wind turbines all run on batteries. And batteries need lithium, cobalt, nickel, and polysilicon. Guess who refines most of those materials? Even when mines exist in Australia, Chile, or the Congo, the refining hubs, the actual bottlenecks that turn raw ore into usable materials, sit overwhelmingly inside Chinese territory. So in the race to go green and break free from oil dependency, the US is building a new dependency on the very country it's supposed to be competing with. Meanwhile, America spent decades optimizing for one thing: efficiency. Just-in-time manufacturing, lean supply chains, minimal inventory, open trade policies. It looked absolutely brilliant on spreadsheets and in boardrooms. Costs went down, profits went up, Shareholders were thrilled. But here's what nobody wanted to admit. Efficiency is brittle. Resilience is slow and expensive. And when you stretch fragile supply webs across oceans and multiple countries, the cheapest producer ends up holding all the leverage. As one economist bluntly put it, we didn't lose manufacturing to cheaper labor. We traded long-term stability for short-term convenience. And now the bill is coming due. Now this isn't about pointing fingers or playing blame games, it's about recognition. Because denial costs far more than adaptation. Every U.S. administration over the past 30 years, Republican and Democrat alike, has underestimated the compounding effect of these small dependency shifts. And now we've reached a point where even trying to decouple has serious consequences. You can't just move supply chains overnight without triggering inflation, massive job losses, or severe political backlash. It's like trying to pull deep roots out of concrete. The entire structure shifts and cracks with it. That's the hidden, insidious nature of systemic power. It doesn't confront you head-on with threats or ultimatums. It quietly constrains your choices until one day you realize you're operating inside someone else's system. And you can already feel it trickling into everyday American life, whether you've named it or not. Shortages that last months longer than they should. Price spikes that never fully correct back down. Tech product delays. Job markets that feel unstable even when unemployment numbers look okay. All of it traces back to supply interdependencies we used to celebrate as efficiency and globalization. The line between healthy global cooperation and quiet structural control is dangerously, invisibly thin. And China has learned to walk that line with near-perfect precision. Let's zoom out one final time and look at the world 10 years from now. Picture it: electric vehicles everywhere, renewable energy grids, smart cities powered by AI, automation in every industry. All of it relying on batteries, semiconductors, rare materials, and digital infrastructure. That's the backbone of the future economy. And the uncomfortable truth? Most of it will be processed, refined, assembled, or routed through Chinese supply chains. Even if the innovation happens in Silicon Valley or Boston, even if the patents are American, the physical infrastructure that makes it all work runs through systems China spent 30 years building. That means in the race to build the future, the US risks becoming a tenant in someone else's economic system. The ultimate irony? The Green Revolution that was supposed to decentralize global power and free us from oil cartels might end up centralizing control more than oil ever did. So here's the final reveal, the part that reframes everything. China doesn't want a new Cold War. They don't want military conflict or ideological victory parades. They want something far more pragmatic, continuity under their gravity. They want global trade to keep flowing, businesses to keep thriving, supply chains to keep humming along smoothly and profitably, just on Chinese terms, just with Beijing holding the valves. Dependency doesn't look like domination when it's happening. It feels like partnership, like mutual benefit, like smart business, until one side quietly, gradually loses the ability to walk away, and by the time people realize how narrow their options have become, how few alternative paths exist, the exits are already gone. Because dependency doesn't feel like chains when you're putting them on. It feels like convenience. It feels like the best deal available. Until the day it stops being convenient, until the day the terms change and you realize you can't say no anymore. So what happens next? What happens when the country controlling the pipes decides it's time to tighten the valve just a little? Imagine pharmaceutical supplies slowing down because of sudden, new regulatory compliance requirements. Battery exports facing unexpected delays right when your auto industry needs them most. Rare earth shipments suddenly contingent on diplomatic concessions nobody wants to talk about publicly. It might not trigger panic or headlines. It might just quietly force compromises, economic concessions, diplomatic silence on issues you used to speak up about, maybe even cultural adjustments. Because in dependency wars, control isn't exercised through conflict. It's exercised through comfort and convenience, right up until it's not. If you only remember one thing from this video, remember this number: over 90%. Over 90% of certain critical supply chains that power your phone, your car, your medicine, and your military all trace back to one country. And that country isn't trying to fight America. It's redesigning the system America depends on to function. In the next video, I'll break down the single move China is making right now, happening this year, that could directly hit American consumers in ways most people haven't seen coming yet. If this changed how you see the global economy and your place in it, hit that like button. And if you want to stay ahead of what's coming before it shows up in your wallet or your job, subscribe right now. Because we're just getting started. And the story gets a lot more personal from here.